Welcome to a special 15-year anniversary episode of Stories from the NNI. I'm Lisa Friedersdorf, Director of the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Jason White, Vice Director and Chief Scientist of the Connecticut Agriculture Experiment Station's Analytical Chemistry Department. His research looks at the intersection of nanomaterials and crops. For example, he looks at how nanoscale micronutrients can suppress crop disease and enhance food production. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first got involved in nanotechnology?
Sure. I got my PhD from Cornell University in environmental toxicology and ended up coming to the experiment station for a postdoctoral position to work specifically on soil contaminants and remediation, specifically a process at the time we were calling sequestration or weathering. So my training and my initial research interests were always in contaminants in soil, and then kind of over time, I came to the experiment station in 1998, and kind of over time, my interest transitioned from not just being focused on what was going on in soil, but what was ending up in agricultural crops. We're an experiment station, so agricultural crops and food safety are one of the things that we look at. So I kind of worked in that area for a while, and then about 2009, I took over the Analytical Chemistry Department. And about that same time, that's when I really started getting a little more interested in nanotechnology. Initially, it was viewing kind of nanoparticles as emerging contaminants, but then over time, my interest kind of transitioned, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit.
So you mentioned in your opening remarks both emerging contaminants and food safety. Can you comment a little about how nanotechnology plays a role in each of those categories?
So as I said, I took over our analytical chemistry department in 2009, and at that time I'd been working for 10 years on contaminants in soil and contaminants moving into crops. So what actually happened was I had a colleague of mine from a local university, and he was in a physics department, and he had a master's student who was working on trying to assess the toxicity of certain nanoparticles to bacteria. And being in a physics department, I suppose they were having some trouble growing bacteria. So the master's student had about 6 months left in his program and no data at all. So this was, I think, December 2008, they gave me a call because they knew I had a lot of experience working with plants and contaminants. So my colleague asked if after the new year they could come over and his master's student could run some experiments on nanoparticles and plants. And I said, sure, favor for a friend. I didn't really know anything about nanoparticles at the time other than the fact that I was pretty sure they were small. But we did have facilities to run, some of your standard phytotoxicity tests that you would run with plants and any contaminant. So the student came over and did some of the germination assays and some hydroponic exposures and worked for about 2 or 3 months. And then we started going through the data. And it was really interesting because one of the things I'd asked him to do was, not being familiar with nanoparticles, I indicated he should use the non-nanoparticle versions of things like silver and copper and zinc just for comparison. And what we saw was that in a lot of the experiments he ran, there was a difference based on size. So nanoparticle silver was more toxic than non-nano silver. And this obviously is no surprise to anybody now, but at the time, this was, early 2009. So we got into the literature, and at the time there was very little published on nanoparticles in plants. We could only really find 1 or 2 published studies. So we wrote up the paper and submitted it to Environmental Science and Technology, and it was accepted fairly quickly and turned around and used that data as preliminary data for a USDA food safety proposal and ended up getting funded in that. And just kind of by serendipity, that 1 year, those proposals were larger. They were 5 years and $1.5 million. So we had a significant amount of funding to really get into some of the potential toxicity of nanoparticles to agricultural crops. I think we looked at 10 or 12 different types of particles, different concentrations, different species. And one of the things that kind of came out of that as we were doing that work from 2011, 12, 13, was that under certain circumstances, sometimes these nanomaterials actually were not toxic. Not only were they not toxic, we would see beneficial effects, which if you're trained as a toxicologist, that's one of the things toxicity is always a function of dose. So those kind of observations taken with the fact that there started to be a realization of the importance of global food security and the unsustainability of agricultural systems. My interest started also going in that direction, how nanotechnology could be used to actually increase crop productivity. So I never really lost interest in nanotoxicology. I still work in that area. I still have people in my lab doing those experiments. And I don't really look at those two areas as mutually exclusive. They're actually interdependent. So now I have active programs in both areas.
We sometimes think of applications in agriculture similar to what's being done in medicine with respect to targeting materials, like precision medicine. So instead of, for instance, spreading nutrients on an entire field, really targeting the plants, or the same for pesticides. Is that the type of application that you can see using these nanoscale nutrients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess kind of the backstory behind all of this is current estimates are that we're going to have to increase food production by upwards of 50 to 100% by the year 2050. And when you look at, most of our year-over-year increases in productivity for our crops, the data is either flat or in some cases where productivity is actually decreasing. So kind of the take-home message is the way we're growing food on this planet is not going to sustain us. I mean, we're going to need to grow food differently. So that's kind of the backstory. So then when you look at agricultural systems now and the way we grow food, the first thing that jumped out and caught my attention was the inefficiency of what we're doing, whether you're talking about a fertilizer that a farmer's using or a pesticide or even water in some cases. Anywhere from 40 to 70 to 80% of what's applied, whether it's nutrients or pesticides, it never makes it to its target. It's either degraded, it's lost, it becomes bound to the soil, depending on what component you're talking about. So we know we have to increase agricultural productivity, but we also know we have tremendous inefficiency in the way we're doing things. So kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you want to think about it that way, is to go after that inefficiency. And how you do that is targeting. There's this concept of precision agriculture, and it's modeled off of precision medicine. Instead of just applying massive amounts of copper from a tractor on a sprayer or even an airplane, can you specifically target a certain type of copper as a fungicide or as a nutrient so that it gets onto the plant when the plant needs it and gets into the plant where the plant needs it? And if you could increase your efficiency, if you could double your efficiency, you'd be increasing food production and decreasing water and energy going into the system. So I think this concept of increasing inefficiency of pesticides, fertilizers, and water as well, though that's not an area I work in, is really going to be a critical component to how we grow food in the next 20 to 30 years.
So Jason, you commented a little bit about the collaborative nature of your work and how you got started in this, helping out someone from the physics department. Can you discuss some of your other collaborations?
There's a couple that come to mind. One of the most active collaborations now is part of the Center for Sustainable Nanotechnology. I think I mentioned this before. This is an NSF chemistry center. It's the CCI program. So about a year and a half ago, I was invited to join the center as a research affiliate, and they've been funding a postdoc in my laboratory. And one of the things that the Center for Sustainable Nanotechnology does is they develop nanomaterials. There's a lot of material scientists in there. So we started working specifically with them to develop different kinds of copper or silica that would have the impacts that we wanted on crops or on diseases that were impacting crops. And the focus of that work is really on the kind of the basic chemical principles of these materials and how that's going to control their activity. So it's a really kind of basic science approach. But by understanding these basic chemical principles, then we can take what we learn and then we can go to other agencies like the USDA, where they're more likely to fund something practical, and we can take those findings and pursue something along those lines. Another project that I'm just getting involved with is with Harvard School of Public Health and University in Singapore, Nanyang Technological University. Singapore is a country that historically has imported a huge percentage of its food, and they have interest in changing some of that now. So their government is putting a significant amount of funding into food production, and they have interest in how nanotechnology can help in some of that. So this new project with Harvard is looking specifically at urban gardening and hydroponic growth and how nanotechnology can be used at a relatively small scale to increase food production. There was a group of us in Singapore in January, and we were visiting in the city, on the tops of buildings, rooftop urban gardens where food production was happening. So that type of project's also going to be really interesting.
As you know, we're celebrating the 15-year anniversary of the signing of the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act. And part of the series of podcasts that we're doing is to reflect on things that we know now that we didn't know 15 years ago. And you've given us a lot of examples, but I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on what the most important advance or areas that have really emerged in the past 15 years under this umbrella.
Well, I think the first thing I'd probably mention are areas that I don't work in, so I don't know a lot about them. But clearly using nanotechnology for disease treatment and water treatment, I think, are going to be two areas where just the benefit is just enormous. And then obviously the other area I would mention would be food production, although I think this is an area that's really just getting started. I mean, I often say this when I give a presentation. If you do a Web of Science search for nanotechnology in agriculture, you can find papers that were published in 2000, 2001, 2002. So there's been a lot of interest in using nanotechnology for food production. But what's interesting is when you look over the years at many of these papers, most of them are review articles. So there's been a lot of interest, but it's kind of a difficult area to work in. So the research addressing some of these problems with the inefficiency of food production really just in the last 5 years has started to take off. So I think that's an area where we're going to see tremendous potential in the future.
One of the things that we hear a lot about the NNI is the fact that it brought disparate disciplines together, and the ecosystem around multidisciplinarity has really changed over those 15 years. Can you share your experience in that respect?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, the NNI, its kind of mantra is this idea of multi or interdisciplinary research, and really that's the only way to do this type of work. From the beginning, I'm trained as a toxicologist, but run an analytical chemistry lab and work in an agricultural experiment station. So even my experience alone is multidisciplinary. But this concept of collaborative interdisciplinary work is really the only way to do this successfully. And not just domestically. I mean, some of my most productive collaborations are with groups overseas. Right now, I have active collaborations with groups in Italy, Belgium, Canada, Mexico, France, and about 6 different universities in China. All of those places, there are postdocs or PhD students in a range of disciplines, everything from material science to soil science to plant biology to molecular biology, working on different aspects of how nanomaterials are impacting plants positively or potentially negatively. And as I said, kind of from the beginning, my areas of research being, nano-enabled agriculture and nanotoxicology, they're not mutually exclusive. If we're going to come up with a technique that's going to be sustainably useful in enhancing food production, it has to be sustainable, which means you have to understand all of the potential negative aspects of what you're doing. So that kind of nanotox perspective never really goes away. And then as a result, by definition, everything has to be multidisciplinary.
Before we close today, I wanted to give you the opportunity to share any additional thoughts or things that you think the listeners should know.
I guess maybe I would say the future is bright, although sometimes it doesn't always feel like that. But I think the problems we face in terms of environmental issues and things like food production are significant. But the recognition that the scientific expertise is there, either in future students or in the groups that are working now, that I think, as significant as these problems are, I think the solutions are there. We just need to find them. And I think nanotechnology is going to play a major role in a lot of these issues. So one of the things I enjoy most, I mean, I work for government, so I don't always get to interact with students as much as I like. But, when I present some of my data to undergraduates or high school students, or as an experiment station, we interact a lot with the public. When I present the types of things that we're working on to those audiences, the excitement and interest that I see from them is really, really compelling. So I think I would say just the optimism that we can solve some of these problems, I think, is really important to keep in mind.
Thank you for joining us today for this special 15-year anniversary edition of Stories from the NNI. If you would like to learn more about nanotechnology, please visit nano.gov or email us at info@nnco.nano.gov. And check back here for more stories.
Perfect.